Live
I think so.
and welcome. Hello. Welcome to the first of many Uvaro office hours. Lindsay, hi. I'm happy to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to see you, Sheila.
I feel like we need to schedule these things more frequently just so we have
Mm.
opportunity to chat. Um,
Yep.
it's noon for you. It's lunchtime. I'm just kind of kicking things off and excited for our time today to chat and just to kind of overview for viewers what we're doing today. Our instruction team at UVAR is incredibly lucky in that our graduate community often brings us the big, hard, sometimes difficult, and prickly questions that they're not always comfortable bringing up with their teams. And what we've noticed over time is that there are recurring themes. So, this opportunity is a chance for us to dig into the thematic topics that have come up repeatedly. It's also a space where grads and adjacent community members can reach out and ask the questions that they want help with, but maybe aren't comfortable raising with their team, their colleagues, for whatever reason, whether it's just the nature of the topic or the team dynamic itself. So today we're going to start with our burning question topic, and we'll get into that in a moment. But what we're also doing is we're fielding live questions. So please feel free to throw your questions into the chat, and we'll pull them up as they come in. I've also got a few that I've just been asked so many times. I'm going to lob them at you, Lindsay, because I'm so excited to hear your
Yeah,
perspectives.
let's do it.
Yeah. So my name is Sheila. I'm the program manager, or I'm the program delivery manager. What do I do at Uvaro? I lead the instruction team. Been working with Uvaro for 2 years now, and heavily involved with the career progression of our community members. Lindsay, do you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you so much for having me here, Sheila. This is awesome. Doing anything in the Uvaro community is always very near and dear to my heart. So my name is Lindsay Lane, and I'm the vice president of customer value at a fantastic organization called Emmetros. So what my title means is essentially I'm responsible for the journey of our customers from the very start all the way through their life with us, their journey with us. So that encompasses working with our BDR team to really uncover those right fit customers, working very closely with our marketing team through to closing sales and having that revenue responsibility. And then also have the ownership of customer success as well. So that full journey cycle of our customers is what I get to have the privilege of doing.
And I have to just add, Lindsay, that I've loved having your perspectives in the classroom because of that continuous nature of the journey. Like you're thinking about it from start to
Right.
finish, and getting them thinking about it that way too has been huge.
Hmm. It definitely can be a game changer for sure, especially whatever career you're wanting within a sales or customer success role in technology. Really thinking through the science, as we call it, and I know Yavaro calls it as well. It very much is a science of what is your ideal customer? How are they going to interact with you? How is your product actually going to help them solve their business needs? So I love that I have, pardon me, this opportunity to be able to see that full journey come through to fruition.
Mhm. I will. I like the parallel because when we think about the journeys that our customer base goes through, the people who go through our programming, we think a lot about that first role, and we arm them to. And when I say first role, I mean first role within this space.
Hmm.
We arm them to succeed. But what we're finding is that we've been spending a lot of time helping them nurture and foster their own career growth and development as well. Very much moving
You
through
got
their own
it.
progression. So I'm excited to get your take on some of these questions that are more related to navigating that career.
Hmm.
And today's topic is actually directly related to managing the relationship that a new hire has, especially when it's their first role in this space, with their manager. How do they
Hmm.
approach it if there's friction? And just in general, we're going to dig right into this topic because it's come up so many times and it's come up in so many different versions,
Hmm.
just especially coming in from other industries with different preconceptions of what the manager employer relationship or employee relationship looks like. So I have some thoughts on where we might go with this. I'm hoping I can make one or two martial arts analogies. If we're really lucky, we'll also pull in an Elvis reference at some point, but who knows?
I love it.
So yeah, so I guess my first thought that I wanted to toss to you, Lindsay, is just when you think about this relationship and potential frictions, what would be your first point of advice to help someone navigate that specific
Mhm.
scenario?
Yeah, and I love this topic so much because I've been really fortunate, and for those who know me in the Uvaro community, know that I talk about this quite a bit. I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have some exceptional mentors,
Mm.
and they've been able to help me navigate through those exact scenarios throughout my career. And what I will say first and foremost is, um, really, first and foremost, get mentors regardless
Yeah.
regardless of what stage you are in your career, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what that dream job is, don't wait till then. Do it right away. Don't wait for someone to ask if they would mentor you, because typically people aren't going to do that. Seek out mentorship. It's very important, especially because you're looking for unbiased opinion. So when we talk about new managers and how to navigate a relationship with a new manager, there's a book that I talk about quite often, and it's called Managing Up. And in that book, they really talk about many rules, but there's these three golden rules. And the first rule is, understand your manager and their goals. So you, as a new employee, you've been hired, you're selling yourself almost as a professional service to your manager to help accomplish their goals, which then are tied into their business unit goals and then the organizational goals. But you, as an individual working with that manager, if you don't really understand their goals and how your goals align to their goals, it can make it challenging for you when you're trying to build that relationship. And those goals can be as simple as, in my first 6 months here, I want to hit my targets, twice, or I want to exceed my targets 5 times. But really understanding how your goals align to their goals, is a very important first step.
Okay, so I'm hearing the importance of finding the mentorship, seeking it out, and then separate from the mentor relationship,
Hmm.
understanding your manager's goals so that you can align yourself.
Yeah.
And this seems like really good advice starting out, whether it's a lot of people with professional experience who are stepping into that first role. I have found there's a bit of friction there because if they're coming from a different industry where mentorship was not a thing,
Hmm.
right, and the relationship was quite
Hmm.
I want to say conflicted previously, the instinct to assume that somebody in this space might want to mentor them is a stretch, and it's something that they have
Hmm.
to kind of come to terms with. So, follow up to this idea of mentorship. When you seek it out and when you look for it, have you ever run into obstacles? What has that looked like? And then any anecdotal things you can share about how it is or isn't possible, and what happens when someone says
Hmm.
no. What do you do, and does that even
Yeah.
matter? What's that looked like?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually have run into that early on in my career,
Mhm.
where I was given the advice to seek mentorship. So I had asked for another leader within the organization that I had worked for if he would be willing to be my mentor. And what it came down to is he really just didn't have the time.
Mm.
So what I turned to, which was very effective, is your networking community within LinkedIn, to really look for meetups, coffee sessions, um, partnerships and groups where you can come together with people who are either in all different stages of their career or new careers. Like, for example, there's women in technology meetups, there's customer success meetups, there's sales and BDR meetups, and it all happens within LinkedIn. And then they're virtual. Pre-COVID, they were in person. But from there, when you're joining those groups, you're going to meet people who are just like you. So you then build your network of colleagues or potential colleagues, but then you're going to meet people on all different levels of their career. And those, like myself, I join meetups actively. I am now going in a more mentor capacity, whereas earlier on in my career, I was more the mentee. So in those sessions is where you can very easily start to build relationships with individuals and ask for their mentorship, because that's the forum. They're there for that purpose. I know I'm laughing about
Yeah.
people in your background.
Me too. I'm for it. And Rizal, I'm hoping the Ducks will join us at some point today. There's a possibility they're back there right now. But okay, that's helpful. And thank you,
Hmm.
Lindsay. And I time seems like one of the most psychological obstacles you might run into,
Mhm.
and finding ways around that. So this question has come up a few times, and I think I saw earlier somebody had thrown one into the chat about approaching those first interactions with your manager. And I'm going
Mhm.
to tie this into where I thought we might go, what we just talked about with mentorship. I would consider almost like a proactive approach to avoiding
Mhm.
this problem. And
Mhm.
first martial arts analogy, classic response in any jujitsu class to how do I get out of this submission or attack? Like I'm stuck in a triangle. What do I do? Every instructor is going to say, first defense, don't be there. And it's so not helpful. And when it happens in the moment, like, of course, you want to avoid getting into these tough situations. So, what we just described, I would say, is a proactive way to manage
Mhm.
avoiding conflict. And I'm going to, yeah, there we go. How should you initially approach your manager?
Mhm.
This, I think, is something, if you're deliberate about, can go a long way to preventing friction from happening. I've got some stories of my own to share that were helpful and weren't helpful, but I'd love to hear, Lindsay, how you
Mhm.
would suggest a new hire. And again, it's imagine it's a career switcher who's taking their first role in tech. How would you recommend they approach their manager initially to avoid situations of conflict?
For sure. So my first golden rule would be to look at every interaction with your new manager with empathy and be objective. So instead of waiting to be told their management style, ask their management style if they haven't actively told you that already.
Mhm.
Being proactive by reaching out to them and in your one-on-ones and saying, um, I want to make sure that you and I are working together well. And your manager may do this, but not all of them do. So it's important that you should. Um, how is it that you like to receive feedback? Is it verbal or is it email? Is it Slack? Because first and foremost, what in my experience, what I have uncovered in my experience when starting new roles, starting brand new careers and new industries, is you can't assume that the way you work is the way they're going to work. So just being very open and honest and say, I want to make sure that I am being responsive to you, that I'm working the way I should, that I'm giving you feedback in a form that you want it to be given,
Mm,
and information, my tasks. How do you want me to give my tasks to you, updates to you? Because a lot of times when you start to have friction with a manager, it's usually because there's been some sort of miscommunication somewhere along the line. And that's a very
mhm.
broad statement, but that's in my experience.
Mhm. And I think what you're describing there allows an employee to kind of get to the root of where that friction might be coming from. Like, what is your
Hmm.
management style? What are your expectations that way? That can be helpful in terms of understanding where things are going, or why things are going the direction that they're going. Do you have any advice you'd share in terms of sharing their own either learning or new process adoption style? Because this is a thing that's come up frequently where I have grads who know clearly how they learn, but how they're being taught does not align. Um, and
Hmm.
you know, just share, tell them. But any advice on how they might approach that kind of conversation?
Yeah, and this kind of goes in line, I think, too. I'll answer your question, but it kind of goes in line to the question that I see up on the screen here around, specific tips if you're an introvert. And I would say, um, you you need to tell them. You really need to. Um, be open and honest about how you learn. Like, for example, myself, I am very much a learner by doing. So in my career, in the earlier days, I probably would have been more shy to bring out that comment and to tell my manager. But um, if you don't, they're going to assume what's working is working.
Mhm,
So you really have to be your own advocate in any walk of life, like in anything within your life. And then on the introvert side, that question that came in from Alex, um, what I have found works, and I'm not an introvert. I'm very much an extrovert. So I'm kind of pulling on other team members that I've had, and personal life and professional life as well. But typically, what I find works is writing it down first. So
mm,
if you're an extreme introvert and you're needing to approach your manager about something and you're super nervous to talk about it and you're not comfortable to go to sit down next to them or have a Zoom call and just talk about it, I would say send an email about it first. Email and say, I'd love to have time with you. I would love to talk to you. And here are the things I'd love to talk to you about. You're opening that door before you've actually started to have that conversation with your
Mhm.
manager.
I love that advice, and I actually wish I'd had it a decade ago. I can recall joining a new sales team, and I am fairly introverted, and I've done a lot of work to kind of put tools together to not represent that way all the time. But I was fairly new to working in general. It was, I think, my third actual job, and I would call it first job that wasn't retail and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember at one point after I'd been there for a while and had quickly established myself as the, if not one of the top, yeah, the top performer on the team at the time, my manager saying, I was wrong about you. I pegged you as you were going to need a lot of support. You're going to need extra help because you're so quiet. That's why I put your desk next to mine. And I remember at that time
Mm.
being like, well, this is a learning moment, right? Because I hadn't felt like I was going to need extra help, but I had been identified that way just because of being quiet. But what that allowed me to do was to bring that up in future roles. You
Mm-hmm.
know, at the beginning of our relationship, it might seem like I'm quiet, I'm processing. That's how I operate. I see, I
Mm-hmm.
absorb, I learn. If I have questions, I'll ask.
Mm-hmm.
Had I been writing down the questions the entire time, I imagine it would have gone a long way to reassure that manager at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, very helpful advice. Now I'll do something similar where I jot down what's the problem, why is it a problem, what do
Mm-hmm.
I want to do about it, and that's what I bring forward.
Right.
So it's a learning process for sure.
Absolutely. And even for myself, like one thing that I found um, w- earlier on in my career was very helpful, again, learning through mistakes, not mistakes, I'm not going to say mistakes, but learning through uncomfortable circumstances, perhaps. Um, what what I've learned in myself is when I have a challenge in front of me, and I know that I need to talk about it, and I know that I need to have those effective conversations. I will write everything down and I will keep it on my screen if it's a conversation on Zoom. If it's a conversation face to face, I will have those points in my book, and that is my sounding board and how I ground myself.
Mm,
Because it's very easy when we're talking about things like this is an emotional topic. This is a very emotion heightened topic. And if you're having an uncomfortable conversation or you're preparing to have what you're assuming is going to be an uncomfortable conversation, your emotions, like everything in you has a physical reaction to that.
yeah.
And then it's very easy for your mind to go off into left field because you're not grounded. So I do that today. I do that personally and professionally. I will keep my notebook. Anyone who knows me, I carry a notebook everywhere I go
Hmm.
because that grounds me in my conversations when I have to have candid conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like your notebook has been at every conversation we had.
Absolutely.
This is fair. Okay, so this question that popped up on the screen.
Hmm.
So I've been asked this so many times. Like I can't. I've lost track. And it's typically somebody who's started a new role. They're maybe a few weeks in, a couple months in, and they have
Hmm.
found themselves in a situation where there's friction, and their first thought is, should I be looking for my next role? Should I be
Yeah.
moving on? Um, and classically, the answer is never the same for every single person, but I always start from a place of trying to understand what the person's priorities are and kind of working through the situation. Um,
Mhm.
Imagine you've got a grad who's coming to you, Lindsay, should I quit? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a very personal one. And I think everybody, because we're talking about this a topic that is so personal, you have to look at yourself, and you have to look at obviously your own lifestyle, what you are able to accomplish and not accomplish. So on the personal side, that's an answer that I don't think anyone can really answer for an individual. What I would say though is that if a grad were to come to me and say, help me, do I just quit? My response back would be, what have you done to have those conversations? So we talk about radical candor a lot. What have you done to have the conversation with your manager around the conflicts, around your thoughts about them? Um, I'll ask them if they're being objective.
Hmm.
So, everything is very heightened, everything is very personal. Is it your side that you're listening to, or are you being objective to think about your manager's perspective? Have you asked their perspective? So I wouldn't out of the gate, I'm not that type of person to
Hmm.
be to want to just quit and walk away. Because usually, like I said before, I firmly believe that under a lot of it is usually miscommunication or lack of communication.
Mhm.
But more than anything, if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I tried everything and I just am not happy, I
Yeah.
need to move on, then that's a different conversation. But if you can look at yourself and say, well, like maybe I could try this. Well, I didn't really try this, but then that's another conversation you need to have with yourself and your mentor or your
Mhm.
or one of your coaches.
And that's very aligned with the thought process that I see them going through and get to be part of. This idea that they should know their non-negotiables, and for most of
Mhm.
them, transparent communication is part of it, and it should go in both directions. So,
Mhm.
have I been communicating? Have I been bringing my concerns? Have I been voicing the things that I need to say, and then start thinking about, am I being heard, before jumping straight to that they're not listening. It's
That's
important
right.
to take those steps, and then also I think knowing their thresholds, which you've kind of touched on, and it's I understand you're saying that's not your instinct to just quit and walk. And you know, I don't think I had pegged you as a table flipper, but I'm imagining there's a point where you would hit it. That's enough. I'm done.
Yeah.
And maybe not physically, but the
Mhm.
metaphorical table flip. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that we all have that point. So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Are you thinking about a time you flipped a table?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think I've never flipped a table
Okay,
in my life.
seems
Not
like you
on
should.
purpose anyway.
Okay, I'm afraid I will seem like a failure if I can't make it work at the job I chose. How can I get okay? This
Oh,
is
this is a good one.
an excellent question. Um, all right, Lindsay, I'll toss it to you, and maybe we can break it
Mhm.
apart into pieces. Because first, let's
Mhm.
talk about what those feelings are, where they come from, how normal they are.
So I'm gonna, and I love quotes. I'm a super quote person. So the first quote that came to mind is actually
Is it Elvis?
no, it's not Elvis,
Sorry, go ahead.
but we can say it is. I think it's unknown. So and I actually have it on a plaque downstairs in our dining room, and it says, "Don't believe everything you think."
Hmm.
And I think of that, and that quote, I remind myself of that often
Yeah.
because number one, why would you be a failure? You're not a failure. Nobody, you're not failing. You're in a job, you're trying to make it work. That is not, you're not a failure. I don't ever want anyone to ever think about those things. Everyone will. So that's when I think you need to really go back to that saying, don't believe everything you think. Just because you're thinking that doesn't mean that anybody else would. And how do you get past those feelings? That's a really, really good question.
Yeah.
Um, and a hard one to answer, to be quite honest, Sheila, because I think it's so specific to the person.
Yeah. I had a conversation recently with my daughter because uh, she screwed something up. I don't even remember what it was. But she internalized it as she was failing and she was the failure. So it was not the
Mm,
behavior that was the issue, it was her. And what she said was, "I don't know why I'm so bad at this. I'm so bad at being a human." And I was like, hearing that from an 8-year-old, that's like, "Oh my god." What's
yeah.
going So we had this talk about trying to separate, your actions and things that happen to you from you and yourself, and recognizing that you and your value are very separate from the experiences that you have. So
Hmm.
even if you were to fail at a new job, does that change your value as a person? No, it
Hmm.
means you've got some learning to do, some things to adjust, or maybe something went wrong at the role.
Hmm.
It does not and should not affect the way we perceive ourselves. That is the hardest thing to internalize as an adult. And I'm
Hmm.
having this conversation with my 8-year-old, wishing I could live this, right?
Yeah.
Understanding that that's an iterative process. And I think the ability to have compassion for yourself the same way you would for someone else, like, if you ever master that, let me know.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's a solid
Me
starting
too.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. And even this, I love this question, and thank you, Alex, for writing it. This brings me back to earlier on in my career when I had a real challenge with a manager, and I had started, and I had never experienced that before. So in my career, like, starting at jobs when I was 14, all the way up to now I'm in my
Mhm.
30s. And I've never had a challenge with a boss before. I've never had a challenge with a
Yeah.
manager or a teammate, and I really had struggled with this manager. And those feelings of failure were hard because I had gone from this one company where I was like a superstar, and then I started at this company, and they were like, she was like, "Yeah, you're okay," you
Wow.
know. Um, but the important lesson is I didn't talk about it with her. Instead, I, had the narrative in my mind, and
Mhm.
that turned into I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I suck. I'm not doing good. Why am I here? Should I just quit? All of those feelings. And what was the turning point was, and I realized that not everybody could do this, but we ended up doing, I'm sure lots of folks know out there, a disc profile assessment. So it's
Mhm.
a personality assessment. And what we discovered were we could not be more opposite from each
Right.
other
Right.
on how we learn, on how we talk, on how we interact with humans. And so doing that work indirectly, we still didn't talk to each other about it, but when you're presenting your findings in this group setting, we both realized how incredibly different we are, and that ended up bringing us together. So from there I got the gumption to talk to her and say, "Listen, I think I've had an epiphany because I just assumed you thought I was a horrible worker." And she was like, "Are you kidding?"
Oh,
No.
interesting.
She's like, "Not at all." She said to me, "I'm hard on you, yes, because I always want to push you. Because if I
Mm.
make it easy, well,
Mhm.
what are you learning?" So it was very interesting. Not saying that I agree with that approach either, but I definitely I it definitely was an eye-opening experience of learning how to navigate a challenge that I'd never had before and learning how to find my own voice, as scary as it can be.
Mhm. Okay, the personality assessment piece, like what a way to crack that open. How else
Mhm.
could you really have run into that? I was actually speaking with a colleague recently about love languages and this idea that,
Yes.
personality type aside, we all have different ways of expressing appreciation, and whether not specifically in a romantic sense, in a professional and just peer to
Mhm.
peer as well. I mean, as we were talking about it, the group that we were discussing it with started sharing, the differences, and it was really interesting to hear it because it wasn't always what I would have expected.
Mhm.
A colleague sharing what they identify as their languages and thinking about how they communicate and express themselves, and going, "Oh, I don't know that I would have pegged that." So I think really taking the time to think through how we like to be appreciated and also express appreciation and having discussion with the people that we are working with.
Mhm.
And it applies at home as well, of course, but
Mhm.
what an interesting process to work with someone for quite some time and then hear that stuff.
Yeah, and I was and I had worked. It was almost 4 years, and this conversation took place about 2 years in.
Mhm. Wow, 2
Yeah,
years.
so it
Okay.
was a good learning for me to be objective and be like, "Okay, Lindsay, you
Yeah.
you you had a responsibility here too that you didn't do. Like I wasn't being fair to my own self." And I encourage anybody too. So anyone that's listening, disc assessments and the love languages, those you can find things that are free on
Mhm.
websites on the internet, because it's important to understand your own, to really understand how you learn, how you like things being done, how you like to be managed, how you would manage people or influence people. You don't have to wait for your company to do those things. You can find free versions of them online to really truly understand your own self.
This is great advice. I feel like we should drop a bunch of resources into our general channel once we hop out of this conversation. Um, I am also cognizant of time. I've just got a bit of a reminder going on. And what I've learned from this, Lindsay, is that these topics, so helpful to dig into and hash through. And it's been super helpful to hear your perspective on all of these things. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing and being willing to be open with
Absolutely.
your own, yeah, with your own experiences. We have more coming up. The next one is May 25th at 12 p.m. The topics are all a little prickly, so we're just going to keep digging into them.
Love it.
Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I loved it. It was great.
Great. We'll see you at maybe at the next one. Who knows?
Yes, absolutely. I'm here.
I love it. Thank you.